All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Avneet, Hira, from talking from Purdue University. Right now, it's wee hours in the morning for me. Right now, it's like 7 a.m. I hope all of you had a good day at work, and I'm delighted that you could be here and be a part of this webinar. The quote that you see on your screen right now is actually something that yesterday while I was compiling these slides for all of you to talk to you about certain things that are important to me and hopefully are interesting to you as well, was actually written at the back of one of the students' t-shirts who was walking around. And I felt like this quote did kind of summarize what we'd be talking about today. A person does not become whole until he or she becomes a part of something bigger than himself or herself. This quote by Jimmy Valvano, in complete honesty, I had no idea who Jimmy Valvano was. And then I looked it up, and so he's an American basketball player coach and also comes on TV and all those kind of cool things. But I felt like this quote really summarized what we'll be talking about here, and also the fact that it was something that was around me at that moment, which also is kind of part of what I'm talking about in terms of culturally relevant engineering design, being observant and being observant to the little culture around you. So with that little bit of quote and that little meta talk, I think we should go ahead. Just a few pointers first. I know there's a way for you to come up with questions, and you can throw questions at me. I'll be keeping an eye out for questions. So if you have anything at any point of time that you'd like to talk about, please feel free and throw a question at me, and I'll try my best to answer that and accommodate that in the time that we have right now. Right, so culturally relevant engineering design, why and how? I understand that this might not be a phrase that anyone would have heard before, in complete honesty, because this idea of, I like to call it cred, because I feel like in colloquial language it kind of it kind of sounds cooler, and when you introduce it to students, it kind of shows that, so taking credibility for your own work, and cred is like a colloquial term for credibility, and so I like to go with this little abbreviation here. So today will be more about just initiating the conversation into this space, and then seeing in some ways, in some constructive ways, of how can we actually be doing more in this space. To begin with, okay, I think I'll have to do this. Yep. All right. To begin with, I'll just give you a brief overview of everything that we're trying to do here. As you got the email, like, this is part of a virtual community of practice. The module today, which is module 0, culturally relevant engineering design, why and how, is what we'll be presenting today. Just a quick caveat there. As a pedagogical practice, I'm not a big fan of this kind of a unidirectional instruction. It's, to be quite honest, it's one of my least favorites. But then again, as much as I want to give you something to construct with and have as many interactive activities as possible, I feel that it is important to initiate ideas and make sure that everyone has something to work with when we have a more one-on-one conversation. And so for the purpose of this webinar, let's assume that I do not have my back towards you. Let's not look at this as one of our more conventional classrooms where sometimes we have our back towards our students and we're trying to give them some really intricate solution to a math problem or something. Let's look at this something as more one-on-one. You can send a question to me right away, or you can email me at any point of time. I'll try my best to get back to you as much as I can. So today's is module 0, and you probably got an email from IUCEE regarding modules 1 and 2, which hopefully in the month of May, I'd be able to do as a one-on-one in-person workshops in some colleges in Northern India, because I'll be in India. But then hopefully earlier in the month of June, I'd be able to do the same in a more webinar format. The reason behind that is that I would really like to come in and see what you and everybody actually think of what I'm talking about, and then be able to edit and be able to kind of massage what I'm trying to talk about and be able to more constructive, because modules 1 and 2 will be more about what you take out of this idea and not so much about, so this is the idea, and so I mean that's kind of the idea behind that. Just to I mean, just quickly getting into why you should even consider being a part of this community of practice. Some of the aims which I've kind of jotted down for myself, they're hierarchical almost to begin with. If you want to help your students grow holistically as engineers, if you want to encourage indigenous innovation and entrepreneurship, you want to build a more efficient and self-sustaining national workforce of engineers. If you want to contribute to a global community that values cultural differences and expands the existing engineering body of work. Now this is something slightly different from what we're usually used to hearing, because even here in the United States, a lot of times we hear the phrase global competition, but there's a new wave of thought and idea coming up, which is this idea of global cooperation, and which really begins at step one, which is more about acknowledging the fact that different parts, that people that come from different parts of the globe actually come with different sets of beliefs and traits, and that's not necessarily a negative thing, but that's a positive thing in a way of how you deal with it and what we make out of it. So that's the big idea behind this. Okay, so that's module 0, module 1 and 2. If you want more information, I'm guessing you'd be sent on an email, or you could just shoot me an email, and I'd be able to I'd be more than happy to answer questions regarding this. So for today, what is it that we're really going to be doing today? To begin with, I call it initiation, because as a space is not necessarily what we associate with engineering. It's engineering with quite a bit of an overlap with more of the human and social sciences space. So it's important for me to say this upfront that for people who have a very solid and a very pure background in engineering, there are parts of this conversation that can get uncomfortable, but it's important for me to give that right initiation here. Being someone who is of an engineering background and is kind of going on, as we say, is going on the dark side with learning sciences research, I feel like there are certain conversations that are important to have when we're doing this kind of work. And so that's what we'll be doing right after this. The second thing that we'll be doing today will be some ideas into what are the theoretical frameworks that are supporting this work. Being a researcher, I find it imperative to provide some kind of theoretical framework with any work that I'm doing. But on top of that, I mean, and everyone realizes this, that whatever we practice is a lot of times, or at least the good practices, the best practices as we call them in education, mostly are rooted in much historical theory. And so we talk a little bit about those theoretical frameworks, and then we'll come down to, as I mentioned earlier, the more constructive parts, because everyone can really play a role in what we're doing today. And for each one of us who are present here to internalize what we're talking about here, we'll talk about how you can actually use certain learning theories to actually practice what we're talking about here. So as I said, I would first give you a quick initiation into this. So I call this a detour because, as important as it is, some people might not consider it really in the space of culturally relevant engineering design. I consider this detour extremely imperative in the entire space of engineering education because my experience with engineering education has definitely taught me these 4 things that I'm going to be talking about. The first thing is human. Throughout this conversation, we'll be focusing more on the human. I am not disregarding technical knowledge by any means, no way. That's absolutely imperative. However, I feel that most people in this conversation are much more experienced and much more qualified than me and have much better ideas than me to actually be supporting the technical side of this conversation. And so I'd be talking more about the humanistic side of engineering here. The third bit is ambiguity. Being someone who now works with learning sciences and a lot of human behavior, ambiguity is something that comes with our work, and as all of you would also realize that as everyone here probably, I'm assuming, works in education in some way or the other, the ambiguity that comes in when you're dealing with human behaviors, and anything can be different anytime, and you don't necessarily always know what you're getting into, and I'm hoping I'll get some heads shaking there. So this kind of ambiguity is actually part of what we do, and so embracing the ambiguity is also something that's really important to be in this kind of cultural space of engineering, because it's so related to human beings. And the last thing, which is probably one of the most important things, is for this to be reflective. Because I'm going to come to this, that there might not always be correct answers for everything, and every individual adapts to what they learn in a different way. It's very important for each one of us to be reflective about what we're learning. Reflection can, in some ways, be looked at thinking about what you were feeling. In some ways, some people call it the first step to metacognition, which of late has become the big it word in how you need to change your pedagogies for your students to be more metacognitive about their own learning. So reflection is really step one that comes with that. How is it that this applies to you? And the great thing about today's webinar is that because it's going to be video recorded, and I'm sorry, it's being video recorded, if at any point of time you consider that you need to stop and just think about what was said, or just think about what's being shown on the screen, please go ahead, please take that time for yourself. You can come back and you can look at this video, but if you feel like there's some thoughts there that need to marinate in your mind, please go ahead and let them marinate, because this entire process should be extremely reflective, as I mentioned. Also, the fact that I mean, human spans for. Yesterday I was in this seminar by Dr. Carl Smith, who's supposed to be who's really the person who kind of started this entire idea of pedagogies of engagement and how you can make your instructional pedagogies more engaging for students. And he spoke to us about this idea of having bookends where you should speak for about 10 minutes, and then you should let your participants at least talk amongst themselves or reflect, think for themselves for about 3 minutes, and then get back to the conversation. In the kind of model that we're following right now, I first thought of giving you a couple of minutes every 10 minutes to think for yourself, but then I had really no clue about what was going to be happening at that point. So if you need to take that time for yourself, please go ahead and do take that time for yourself. Okay, so now, to begin with, the bottom line up front. I call this BLUF, and I feel that it's important for every conversation, because till now, I kind of gave you, I'm hoping I gave you a very good sense of this ambiguity that I've been talking about, but what are we going to get to by the end of this conversation, so that you guys don't necessarily feel that, oh, where are we going with this? So the bottom line up front for this entire little endeavor is there is a need for culturally relevant engineering design, and there are ways to achieve that. So these are kind of the two constructors that we'll be working with today, and I'll be hopefully be showing enough evidence to prove these two things. However, there's a little caveat with that, and that caveat is that, however, there is no all-encompassing answer. If this makes you slightly discouraged about going ahead with this conversation, I feel that you should probably want to challenge yourself a little more, because the reason that there is no all-encompassing answer is because all of us are equally capable of coming up with best possible answers to work within this kind of space. I'd like to put out now, because I've already put out my bottom line, that there is a need for culturally relevant engineering design, and there are ways to achieve that. I feel it's important for me to put out what I really mean by culture. For the scope of the presentation that we're doing today by culture, I would mostly be referring to the Indian culture. However, when I do talk about the larger idea of cred, I like to cite this definition, which was given by a paper by Atmiya, which was written in 1996, and that says that culture includes the expectations, beliefs, attitudes, language systems, and values that influence an entire community of people, which can also be looked at. So if you just look at this definition, that can be like a nationalistic culture. It can be a culture of community of people who live together, basically people who share these beliefs, attitudes, and language systems. Furthermore, because this definition was actually paraphrased and then added on to from another definition, which was given by Shade and New in this paper that they wrote in 1993, and which said that culture provides the rules and guidelines for appraising and interpreting interactions with events, people, or ideas encountered in daily life of a community. So these are not definitions that we need to remember. The reason I didn't put them out on the screen is because it was just important to run by them, and then whatever you make of culture in your head after hearing of this is what culture means to you. Yeah, this entire thing is going to be extremely liberating and also empowering in that way. All right, so let's go ahead with our first real theoretical framework. So I was talking about we need to humanize engineering, right? Why? So the question is that, and I mean, this is something that I've asked myself a lot of times. That, yeah, engineering is done by humans. What's this entire need, or what am I talking about when I say humanize engineering? So I had the opportunity to sit down with some of my colleagues last year, led by my dissertational advisor, actually, Dr. Morgan Hines, and we came up with this framework that you see on your screen right now. This framework that we called Engineering with, For, and As framework. It was in a paper that we presented at the IEEE FIE conference, which was in Madrid last year in October. And this framework really, if you look at it, tries to look at the human aspect of engineering by almost giving it like, by democratizing engineering in some way. So when we say that engineering is with, for, and as people, to begin with, when we say engineering is with people, we mean that, so when I'm working as an engineer, I would ideally be working in a team, or I would be working in some sort of a hierarchical order, but there are other people who I'm working with, and that's where the ideas of teamwork and how engineers work together come in. When we say engineering is for people, I feel like this is one of the most cited and the most used parts of engineering, because the ideas of user-centered design and you need to engineer for people is definitely something that that comes up pretty often. The third part, which is probably not looked into as much, but is also extremely important, is this engineering as. I am engineering as a human being. My personal beliefs of what I feel about something, my personal beliefs of what I feel is important and what is not important, knowingly or unknowingly, definitely permeate into the engineering solutions that I design. And that's where this entire cultural aspect and the sense of being of an individual comes in, that who am I, how do I relate with these things, and what am I trying to create? And I feel that we as educators definitely have an effect on all these three parts, but we have a huge impact and also on definitely this as place of engineers, which is really important, as we'll see over time as we go into more theoretical frameworks. So just talking more about this as part of it, the next framework that I'd like to talk about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. In the little shout out that we sent about this particular webinar, I'd mentioned a paper that I'd written for the Journal of Engineering Education Transformations, which was the ontological side towards the next generation engineer and ontological approach. So I'm not too sure of how many people actually went ahead and went through this, so I'm just going to quickly look through this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So why is it, so to begin with, why am I even talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, right? So when we're talking about, because this is about engineering education, when we talk about what is the purpose of an education, so from time immemorial, everybody from Socrates to the more recent philosophers have always believed that, I'm sorry, I'm not going to use the word always, but have mostly believed that the purpose of an education is for self-actualization of an individual, but your own realizing of who you are and what you need to be. And so Abraham Maslow came up with this theory of hierarchy of needs, that and every individual has these hierarchical needs, and only when the bottom need is actually satiated can you move on to the next need. And so I find this interesting because in different cultures there are different places for this need, and that's why I find it interesting to bring this up here. Also the fact that, so I've cited Finkelstein here because this graphical representation was actually created by Finkelstein. When Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs theory, he did not really draw out this pyramid, but the pyramid is something that has almost become the face of this theory over time because it's a graphical representation of what his theory was. So just quickly, if you look into this, and I hope you can read the text on your screens here, the bottommost level, which is the physiological needs, are the more absolute human existent needs. You go above that, and those are more needs of safety, things like employment, having a good family life, health, property. You go slightly above that, that goes to more relationships, friendly, having good friendships, having those kind of relationships. A step above that is where this entire idea of self-efficacy starts coming in, of what an individual thinks of himself or herself, what his self-esteem is, and those kind of things. And the topmost level is this place of self-actualization. So it's important to mention here that everybody might not reach this place of self-actualization, but as educators, it is our aim to help our students reach this place of self-actualization. And so this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. I'll be referring back to this, and that's why I put it out there. And also for everyone to just get on the same page of how of what a lot of people think of what are we talking about when we say engineering as human beings? What is it that the engineer's own sense of being is? And that's why I put this out there. Moving on, so that was about the humans. Now I keep calling it culturally relevant engineering design. So why is it, what do I mean by that? Why do I keep saying, I mean, you know, like engineering design is for everybody. What is so important about it being culturally relevant? First of all, the socio-cultural nature of engineering knowledge and need. So this is kind of, it's extrapolated on certain theories that were set out by Grillo and Sterrett and Wenger, which basically means that, the first quote is really from them, which is, knowledge is not information, it is not an object that can be physically stored somewhere. Rather, engineering knowledge is really something that varies over different cultures because the way that it is developed is different over different cultures. In some ways, this is also taken from a much older theory of Vygotsky, and we'll talk about Vygotsky's theory in a little bit. But it's important to acknowledge the idea that what engineering knowledge and need is in certain particular cultures, and I've already defined cultures for all of us here, is not necessarily the same in different parts, because if you look at knowledge, it really resides in the skills, understandings, and the relationships of the community members of this culture, right? And also in the tools, documents, and processes that they embody. Now this is like a whole lot of theoretical mumbo jumbo. I'll give you a quick example for this, and I'm citing this example from a work by Crew. So what had happened was that there was an engineering problem of making better stoves. You know, like cooking stoves, which was, if I'm not mistaken, which was some parts of India and some parts of Eastern Africa. And there were some European expatriates who were trying to solve this problem. So according to them, they came up with the best possible solution that they could come up with. And this is, I mean, if you need to look it up, it's in a study by Crew. It was published in 1997. And the name of the bigger book that this is a chapter of, it's chapter 3, is Discourses of Development. But anyway, you can see references at the end of this. So what happened with these expatriates trying to design engineering solutions for people whom they did not necessarily relate with was that they completely missed what the point of this little artifact of the food stove was. Like, for example, what the women used to do was the fact that the walls of the stove were not insulated enough, and so they would use that to actually heat up their house. But what the designers did was they said, oh, that's inefficiency, and they used all principles of thermodynamics, and they made an insulated stove for them. And then when it came down, and when the rubber hit the road, and when it came down to them actually using it, the women and everyone who was using it was like, oh, but that's not I mean, that's not one of the intended consequences of the design here, and other things related to that. And so that's where this idea of how what engineering knowledge is and what the need of this engineering is not the same over different cultures. There are things that brings it together, but there are things which are absolutely different, and we'll be talking more about this. The other thing is the paradigm of engineering is not necessarily the same over cultures. Now, what do I mean by paradigm? What I mean by paradigm is what an engineering identity is when we're growing up, when we're in school, or when we're in undergrad or college, or even when we're working as a professional engineer. If someone mentions to me, I'm an engineer, what I think of it in one particular culture or within one particular community of people might not necessarily be the same as compared to a completely different community of people. And I'm not going to give you more of an example here, but the slides that follow dwell more into this, and we take more India-specific examples and what the Indian engineering paradigm is to actually elaborate more on this point. Moving on, which is what's special about being an Indian engineer, and I feel like this is definitely a good part in this conversation, in this webinar, to start reflecting on what you're thinking, because there are certain things that I'll put out there, but then there'll be so much more that you would have, and I would love to hear from what you think about what we're talking here within the space of what we're talking here. So what is special about being an engineer? What is this engineering paradigm that I'm talking about? Well, to begin with, the sense of being. Going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the idea of self-actualization. So what is it that, how is it that I as an Indian engineer am heading towards this self-actualization? To just quote a few numbers here, and some of these numbers are from 2011. I couldn't necessarily find something much more newer, but the idea kind of remains the same. So if you look at it, and this is kind of comparative, so in June 2011, the Association of German Engineers reported that they had 76,400 vacant engineering jobs. Again, in the same year, the unemployment rate for engineers in the United States was 2%, whereas in 2012, which is actually a year after that, 200,000 engineers and 130,000 diploma holders were unemployed in India. Now, this isn't, I don't bring out these numbers to show that, oh, what are we doing, and there's something that's wrong. The reason I put out these numbers is because if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right at the bottom was this need of employment, was this need of food and shelter, and that's why I want to bring this out here, that at different places in different cultures, we don't necessarily start at the same place on the pyramid in itself. So keeping this in your mind and internalizing this idea is kind of important here. The other thing is this sense of being an engineer. Who am I? What kind of resources do I work with, and what is so different? And to just give you, and again to prove this with an example, if you look at Chandrayaan-1, right, which was hailed as the cheapest moon mission, which was about, the worth was about $80 million. If you compare it with, say, the Mars Orbiter mission, which is by NASA, I'm sorry, the Mars Orbiter mission, the Indian Mars Orbiter mission, which is again one of the cheapest interplanetary mission to Mars, which is worth about $73. On the other side, NASA estimated a budget of $104 billion for a moon mission to return back to the moon by 2018. Now again, so the kind of resources, the point that I'm trying to make here is that the kind of resources that we work with in different cultures is different. And so it's important to actually be subservient and to recognize these kind of differences and to know what are the resources that we're working with. The next thing, so now I feel like I've given you enough philosophy to work with, and let's move into the more pragmatic side of this. I'm gonna hit you with a question to begin with, and that is, there aren't enough jobs for all engineers, but are we done producing all the engineering marvels that can be produced? And this is again one of those places where I would appreciate if you're more reflective about this question. This is obviously just a part of a much bigger picture, but I feel like this question is important to put here. So what are we working with here? Keeping in mind all the philosophical aspects and theoretical concepts that we just spoke about. This is the more pragmatic need. This is what we're hit with day in and day out. So what is it that we can do about this? Well, one of the solutions is innovation. One of the first reports that ever spoke about the idea of empathic design, or some of us in India like to call it empathetic design, which was an article which was published in the Harvard Business Review written by Leonard and Rayport. And this article is one of the earliest initiations into this idea of empathic design. It put forward innovation as one of the biggest skills that even if you look at purely jobs, even the corporate is looking for. So it really emphasizes on the human side of engineering and why understanding the user is so important. And innovation in itself, as we're talking about making these new realms, and that's why innovation is so important here. And it is not just a byproduct, it is definitely one of the aims of what we're trying to do with GRED. A second, a byproduct, or in sometimes also an extrapolation of innovation, is the entrepreneurship. And also, I didn't necessarily feel the need to provide any citations here because, as is obvious to everybody, it's a big solution to the issues of unemployment and creating these new engineering marvels that we're talking about. So, where do we begin with? First, the second slide will be the tangible side to it, but from an intangible thing. So we have this, I wouldn't necessarily call it a problem, but we have a need, we have a situation which I tried to paint in front of us until now in this webinar. But how do we begin with this? So the first is, so coming back to the more existential question from the previous slide, have all problems been identified? And this is where we kind of try coming up with an answer. And it is just pushing boundaries sustainable. And what I'm going to say now is something that I was actually thinking about all night while I was preparing the talking points for today, is pushing the realms of already existing technologies the only way? Or should we also be looking for creating new realms altogether? And this is where CRED comes in big time. This is where culturally relevant engineering design comes in big time. Creating these new realms, and how can we really do that? And this is kind of like, it begins with problem identification. And we'll talk more about the constructive side to this. But to just operationalize this, right? I mean, what do I necessarily mean by it's just pushing the boundaries sustainable? And I'm going to give you a very crude example from this just from the top of my head. Should our students only be working on the next fastest car, or I mean, I'd say, because my background is in aeronautical engineering, or say the fastest commercial airplane? Is that only what they should be working on? Should we only be extending the already existing bounds? Or should we actually be also using this engineering body of knowledge that's been developed so far and is also constantly emerging, but should we also be using this engineering body of knowledge to solve problems in completely new realms? And so I don't have all the identified problems. That's what I said. Nobody has all the answers. The way one of your students identifies a problem which is around him or her would be completely different from the way somebody else who's just sitting next to him or her would. But this idea that what you can solve around you is also an engineering solution to problems is basically what CRED boils down to. What is it that is culturally relevant around me? What are the problems around me in my culture that I can solve that can lead to things like innovation and entrepreneurship and creating these new realms for engineering altogether? So as I promised, so this was slightly intangible, but moving into the more tangible part. So where can we start? So this is where it's going to be extremely empowering, and I feel, and I say this with a very big smile on my face. You are in a position to initiate this change more than anybody else, because you shape the people who shape the world. We can't, as I mentioned in the last slide, you and I can't go out and design all of these new solutions. However, we can be these change makers who encourage people to go ahead and do these things. And I mean, with these lines, no, I'm trying my best not to be cheesy, but I find it hard not to get excited about this, because if you look at it, I mean, the possibilities for this kind of work are absolutely limitless. There's actually no place in my head where I can think of where we can stop with this kind of work. The direction, the encouragement that we can provide can do absolute wonders. And you know what the best part of all of this is? That you don't need to have all the answers, because interestingly, nobody has all the answers. We're in this constant search of finding all the answers, but nobody necessarily has all the answers. And so students, teachers, facilitators, policy developers, researchers, everybody being human, and that's why I just put a silhouette there. That silhouette is not supposed to look like anybody in particular, but all human beings who are part of this can really make this change. And so part of this is also in realizing that the expertise, so as I mentioned, that you don't necessarily need to have all the answers. A different way of looking at that same statement is that to work within this space, the expertise does not always reside in the instructor. The expertise can also reside in the student himself or herself. But then that does not mean that the instructor is not required. Because the instructor is the person who makes all of this happen. But because it's absolutely humanly impossible for one individual to know more than another individual in every possible realm, and that's why I say that there are certain things that the students can have a higher expertise sometimes than even the instructor. But the idea of acknowledging that is where all of this comes down to. Okay, so moving on with, so what, and I keep saying like it's about extending what an engineer can do, but I feel like this is a good time to really talk about and I mean I feel almost weird saying this. So who is an engineer? Because I know I'm talking to a big group of people who are absolutely prolific at what they do, and they more than anyone know, but I just feel like it's important to just go back to this in our conversation. There are engineers without degrees, and then there are degrees without engineers. What I mean by this is that there are people out there who are producing new engineering marvels who might not even necessarily have a degree in engineering, and then there are people who have degrees in engineering and are not necessarily doing any kind of engineering. This is kind of meta, but to go more into this space, I like to go into where the word comes from, and as most of you would know, the engineer comes from this Latin word of engineer, which means to contrive or to devise, to come up with something, to come up with a new idea, and to operationalize this for us to better internalize these ideas. I find this is one of my favorite studies I've ever read, and it's not really a study, it's more like it's more like a paper, a thought paper, but this work by Cohn, in which Cohn talks about these 4 big aspects that make engineering engineering. And one of the reasons why I love this so much is because and one of the reasons I love this so much is because it's just absolutely amazing in terms of how ambiguous it can be. Hold on, I think I have a question. All right. Hi, Avneet. I'm really enjoying your lecture. I'm not an engineer. Oh, okay. I've majored in development studies, but I had a question about your section. Assume that experts have greater knowledge about us. Of course. All right. So, all right. So, I'll answer. So basically, if I can paraphrase this question for everybody there, and this is really interesting and it's an important question, and that's why I decided to take it in the middle. This question is about experts know. Do experts always know more than what more than who the people that they're working with, and is this an important part of CRED? CRED, because culturally relevant engineering design is taken so much from Vygotsky in principle, and the theorist Vygotsky had this idea of the zone of proximal development, in which a a more knowledgeable other helps other people around him within the same community, within the same culture, to cross this zone. So if you have to picturize it, if you have to picturize it, so below is where an individual is, and the more knowledgeable other helps that person take a step above. And I feel like that's where experts come in. So your idea about experts being experts knowing more than the people around them is absolutely correct. But where cred comes in is the fact that everyone can be an expert at different things. And this is just absolutely crazy, because yesterday I was talking to someone about how global teams work and how people bring in different expertise. And the idea that everyone can really serve as a more knowledgeable other for somebody else in a different space is just absolutely amazing. And I feel like that that kind of goes into the space that you're talking about. Okay, so now just quickly going back to this idea from Kohn. So who is an engineer? An engineer produces change. An engineer comes up with the best possible solutions. An engineer uses the resources that are available to him or her. And engineering work allows uncertainty, because there is not necessarily a correct answer. I feel these things are always at the back of my head when I try to define what an engineering problem is or what an engineer does. To go in, now I feel like I'm sorry, I tend to use a lot of colloquial words here because I work with a lot of students, and I just feel like if if you talk in the language of people, it's more easy to understand what you're talking about. So enough with all the mumbo jumbo. What can we do here? What can we as educators, as engineering education researchers really do here? Well, to begin with, as I mentioned earlier, there is no correct answer, but then the good side to that is that there are as many correct answers as it is possible to have. For example, you can do as little to as much as you want. So I'm assuming that there are people here who design courses or at least deliver courses. So the kind of examples that you use within your course, if you're trying to let's just use thermodynamics again. If you're trying to explain to your students certain principles of thermodynamics, if you try to explain to them how their grandma's stove at home works, and something that's more relevant to them, something that they can understand, something that's personally meaningful to them, that's really the smallest place where we can begin at. Then we can move on to into the projects within what we do. We can move on to courses altogether. In fact, module 2 of this is actually a course that I designed over this semester, which is completely inspired by the ethos of CRED, and I'm extremely excited to share that with this community and see what everyone has to say about this. And then moving on to more real-world applications. This can see face in the form of capstone projects or senior design projects. I don't know what they're called. And back in my undergrad, we used to call them a capstone project. Seeing more applications within the culture, seeing what is required within a culture, and actually making those kind of solutions. These are kind of the spaces that we can be working in. There's definitely more conversation here, but as I said, that I would like to have a more one-on-one conversation with certain people who are in the ground, and that's why I would touch more on this and give more examples for this in module 1, 2, and what is there to follow. But and this is kind of coming towards the end of my webinar today, but I'd like to talk about learning theories a little bit, because well, to begin with, I'm a learning theory researcher, and if there's anything that I can share with my community back home are these things that I've learned over the past few years being here, and what are these theories that everyone's talking about. Like, everyone's talking about experiential learning and project-based learning, but where is it that these things come from? And the reason I'm mentioning these learning theories here is because these earlier ideas that I spoke about, all these ideas can actually be used if we can actually be implemented within classrooms via the means of these learning theories. And on the face of it, they might seem daunting to begin with, but as I'll go into explaining 3 of the bigger learning theories that are prevalent these days, we'll realize that it's that these are things that you and I almost practice every day, but just the acknowledgement of the fact that these are legitimate theories that people actually use and people have been using for a very long time will actually help with using them more and knowing that this is the right way to go, and using these theories to, to use the principles of CRED in everyday classroom kind of activities. The first theory that I'd like to talk about is behaviorism. And I'd like to put this out there. This theory is kind of not necessarily used as of now, but the reason I put it up is because in the Indian educational system and even in the US educational system, a lot of times this is the kind of theory that we still resort to. B.F. Skinner was supposed to be the person who kind of started this idea of operant conditioning, which basically is a behaviorist theory which is based on the fundamental idea that behaviors can be reinforced. So if you reinforce a behavior, that behavior will tend to continue, whereas if you punish a behavior, that behavior will eventually end. So if you people are thinking a reward system or some kind of a reward punishment system, yeah, those are kind of the ideals of behaviorism. So this theory was actually more on a, so if you give a student the right stimulus and over time you keep giving that student that stimulus, the student will learn to behave in one particular way. This theory is not as much used. This theory is not necessarily what we would like to use when we're talking about CRED, but it's important to know what we're doing and what is it and how is that different from what is more accepted or what is more evolving and what is it that everyone's talking about. And that's why I put out this idea of behaviorism. If you want to know more about this theory, you could just Google or Bing, whatever we're using these days, any one of these words, and you'll definitely have more here. I would have more on this in the references in the end of this. But now moving on to kind of what CRED, the learning theory that is important to CRED, and that is this idea of constructivism. Most of us would have heard of Piaget, Papert, and Brunner. This idea of constructivism, so it's important to put out there that Piaget actually never called his theories constructivist theories, but he still somehow called the father of constructivism. But before I go in kind of more historical stuff there, let me talk to you about what constructivism really is. So as the word suggests, what the theory of constructivism, what the learning theory of constructivism says is that people construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing things and reflecting on those experiences. And now, yes, I'm assuming you're making that connection with why constructivism is so important for the idea of culturally relevant engineering design, because what we construct of our culture, what our students construct of our culture, and how they construct the social and cultural knowledge is kind of what forms the baseline of culturally relevant engineering design. And so Piaget kind of, as I mentioned, came up with this. The entire idea of inquiry-based learning is something that is inspired by the work by the theory of constructivism. Also experiential learning, as I mentioned slightly earlier. Project-based, yes, somewhat. Project-based learning also falls into the space of situated cognition, which is a more Vygotskian principle, and which is the next slide after this. But just to mention about the other two gentlemen who are as important in this in the space of learning sciences, Seymour Papert, he gets the most credit for developing this idea of constructivism. He took in from Piaget and he developed this idea of constructivism. You could look up more about him and his work if you find this interesting. And furthermore, Jeremy Brunner is supposed to be more very active in actually using this work of constructivism and making more theories around it. The term that is more associated with Brunner, even more than constructivism, is this idea of scaffolding, which is similar. The idea of scaffolding is literally what it means, what the word scaffolding means literally, and that is that knowledge that we develop scaffolds over one another. So something that I learn is part of this bigger cognitive structure, and the moment I learn something new, it gets I assimilate it and then I accommodate it into this cognitive structure that already exists in my head. And so this is this big idea of constructivism. I mean, there are courses and webinars on this theory alone, but I just thought that it's important to be talking about these theories when I'm talking in this space, because these are the kind of ideas that encouraged my work, my colleagues' work in what I'm talking to you about today. The third theory and the last theory that I'll be talking about today, and this is almost coming to an end for the webinar, is this idea of social constructivism. Now this is my absolute, and I know I mentioned Vygotsky's names all throughout this presentation, which makes me feel that I probably should have actually spoken about social constructivism slightly earlier in this presentation. But well, all of us learn. I'm an engineer. It's an iterative process. I'll learn and I'll make this change in this presentation. But the idea of social constructivism, which was brought up by Lev Vygotsky, is really a variety of cognitive constructivism that emphasizes on the collaborative nature of learning. So everything that we spoke about constructivism in the preceding slide is still true, but Vygotsky's idea was that, so this constructivism is not just something that the individual develops for himself, but it really is also developed by the interactions that an individual has, the cultural interactions that an individual has. To speak more into this, so even though Vygotsky was a cognitivist, Vygotsky did talk about how structures within the human brain and the human mind work, but he kind of rejected this assumption that the work of Piaget and other people who were working in this space had, that it was possible to separate the learning from the social context. And that's why for me personally, the theories of Lev Vygotsky are very extremely important, because Vygotsky says that it's impossible to separate how an individual develops from where he or she develops, the culture that he or she develops in. And yeah, I mean, if your heads are nodding and if you have a certain smile on your face, because now you can see how this entire thing is summing up, because these are the theories that this is built out of. Further, Vygotsky argued that all cognitive functions, they originate in and must therefore be explained as products of social interactions. He also said that learning was not simply the assimilation and accommodation of new knowledge, which was purely constructivist. He said that it was the process by which learners accommodated this new knowledge via the integration of this larger knowledge community. And this is that social community that we're talking about. I would love to go on and on about this. In fact, I facilitated a class a few weeks back, and I took about 3 hours only to talk about Vygotsky's theory, and I felt like that time wasn't enough. But if someone wants to talk more about this or look up more about this, I'd be more than happy to provide this kind of knowledge community for this. But I find this interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted this to be one of our last slides was because this is kind of tied into this idea of community of practice. This integration into the knowledge community that Vygotsky talked about was actually the encouragement for the idea of a community of practice. This community of practice that that all of you and I are also trying to create is also kind of this culture that we're trying to create, which produces knowledge in some way. And so I felt like this is almost a meta moment to kind of end this webinar. Just very quickly, what's next? What can we expect next? Well, modules 1 and 2, I've spoken enough about them. And this virtual community of practice, I've been thinking about seeing a common platform, and I need to talk more to the IUCEE's support staff about this, about how we can have a common framework for everybody to contribute ideas if there's certain things that you're doing in your class, and how we can add to those things. And I feel like the ideas that come up in the more interactive workshops can also be a part of this community of practice. So you can expect some kind of an email from us sometime soon to see how we can be in a more integrated platform for these kind of things. Before I end this, I'll just look into if I have any more questions.
Avneet, this is Krishna here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, good. Excellent webinar, and I'm going to encourage, we have still time for questions. We don't have any new questions, but I encourage people to, to send in questions, and I will volunteer to read them out for you as they come in so that you can focus on the answer rather than trying to look at the little letters, okay?
All
So
right, thank you.
let us wait for a few minutes and let people, it's a very thoughtful presentation, so it will take time for everybody to digest it and come up with questions. But while they are thinking about the questions and sending them in, what you mentioned at the end, that we should have a platform where these kinds of things discussions will continue with this group. That's an excellent idea, and that's exactly what we were planning to do. Create this virtual community. So I'll put together some kind of a group. I think which hopefully will be easy to access online. And then you and I, we can work together in monitoring this, and definitely this the people who attended this webinar and those who maybe could not attend because of other time commitments probably, as well as a YouTube recording of this particular webinar that will be placed on that site, and the people will be invited to join the community, and let us see how it pans out. Okay, so this is fantastic.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. As people come up with questions, I'm going to just change this slide to references because
Sure.
I feel a moral obligation to do that.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, there's so much knowledge from various sources that's assembled together, and the way you presented it is very clear and easy for everybody to follow along, although I'm sure there's lots of very complex theories behind the whole, we have a question or comment, and this is from the previous question was from Kavya Srinivasan, by the way. So Kavya, thank you for giving that that question, which you already answered. Rajesh Kumar is the one that answers questions here. He says society may have practices that are not wrong, such as black magic. Superstitions, should that be encouraged, that are not right? He might probably have meant maybe that are questionable, such as black magic, superstitions, etc. Should these be encouraged? And he says, yeah, that's his question.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Rajesh Kumar, for that question. So this is interesting because when we start talking about society and culture, the one thing that I probably missed talking about was moral and ethical obligations. So, for example, my moral and ethical obligation here as a researcher was to make sure that I brought up the references here. So, if we're talking about so black magic and superstition and those kind of things which are prevalent in a society, that's kind of the society in itself being self-corrective. So I won't necessarily say that CRED stands for these kind of social practices which in itself have been proven over time emergingly within the society as wrong, but the idea of I mean, the entire idea. So okay, so there's this interesting article that I find this interesting article that I read some time back, which spoke about how when we talk about engineering design and we talk about engineering in itself, there are things out there that people have made using the laws of science and math and using engineering, which are absolutely disastrous to the world that we live in. But they did use engineering. So when we talk about engineering design and coming up with new ideas, we kind of are moving ahead with this assumption that most people who use it are actually, we're kind of moving ahead with this idealism that people who actually are a part of this have a certain sense of sanity involved with them. So to be very honest, I feel like this kind of comes down to moral turpitude, and it's very interesting that this question came up because as educators, there definitely is one side of it also that we need to look at, and that's where the idea of ethics and the idea of moral education even within an engineering curriculum comes in. I know my answer was kind of scattered, but I hope that kind of answered the question.
Good answer. Question from Archana Mantri. How does the theory of cognitism fit into CRED?
How does the theory of cognitism fit into CRED? All right. So the idea of cognitism is basically how internal cognitive structures of a mind work. So cognitism is basically making these the cognitive structures that are being made over time in an individual's head. And this is kind of the difference between Piaget and Vygotsky, because according to Piaget, the cognitive structures were already being made just by an individual. However, what Vygotsky's theory of social constructivism, and that's why I mentioned this in my presentation, was that he was a cognitivist, but he had a problem with cognitivists who believed that you just learn things purely by yourself. And Vygotsky put ahead this claim of what you were learning was in a big terms a function of the social aspects and the social interactions that you had. So so after saying all of this, to give a one-line reply to that question, the theory of cognitism fits in this in a way that the cognitive structures that you form and the way that you learn things in a lot of times is actually related to the social interactions that you have. So I learn particular things, I learn particular ways to solve engineering problems because of the society that I learned them in. In fact, if I may use that word, yesterday I solved a problem and I explained this to a Colombian friend of mine that what I used here was jugaad, which is which is a Hindi term for really just coming up with a solution one way or another, which is something that I learned in Indian engineering undergraduate school. But that is kind of the social interaction that I had, and I formed a cognitive structure in my mind.
Question from Renuka says, when an Indian student gets integrated into an education system of another country like in the US, will cultural differences play a barrier?
Sure. Oh, great. Thank you. Will cultural differences play a barrier? So this really comes down to how and that's why it's important for us to encourage and help our students acknowledge these differences. So someplace in my slides I spoke about how there are socio-cultural differences, but then accepting that there are socio-cultural differences can actually help in making these global teams. I've been working with a colleague. In fact, I have a presentation later today in which we're supposed to be presenting to some people who are involved with first-year engineering at Purdue, because Purdue is such a multicultural, international kind. I think almost 50% of our engineering undergraduate students are internationals. Of how do these people work together? And the idea is that even though different people from different cultures bring in different kind of traits and beliefs, this definitely requires some kind of a constructive work to believe that the different things that we bring to the table are actually equally important to engineering. So this is important work that needs to be done in this space. So to your question, are there barriers? Well, there are barriers if we go into a more narrow view of this. However, the good side to this is that there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of constructive work being done within this space in institutes outside of India, and I'm hopeful even within India, that kind of builds students' self-efficacy in their own beliefs of who they are as engineers and actually bring their own ideas to the table rather than shy away. So that's my answer to that question.
Great, yeah. There's an interesting comment by Jandala Narayana. He says, okay, this sounds like either it's think globally but act locally, or vice versa, think locally and act globally. So I guess it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek question there, I guess.
Well, I'm actually writing this down to understand what this is. Okay, to be very honest, this is wow, interesting. I would say both, because
I think that's why he probably put it. He probably said, you know, to come up with the first one, and then he says, maybe it's the other one also. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's, as I mentioned, it's about the ambiguity, right? It's really both. It depends on where we are. I mean, I'm acting globally, but I'm thinking locally right now. But you know, earlier I was doing the opposite, so I feel like it's both.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And I think he himself realizes that. Renuka comes back and says, you mean to say diversity is welcome. I think that, you know, probably obvious, but go ahead.
Absolutely. Diversity is absolutely welcome, and that's where I spoke about how, and this is not just a conversation that we have in engineering education. I mean, I completed my master's in aerospace engineering at Purdue, and this is something that we talk about there as well, that there is an immense need to move from the idea of global competition to the idea of global cooperation, the idea that everybody has something different to offer, and the idea that everybody needs to be brought together. some of the research that we do is also this idea of how you can really broaden the participation in engineering by broadening the contexts that we cover. So people with diverse backgrounds, people who come from different cultural contexts can actually be as much a part of engineering as the more dominant the people from more dominant demographies are at this moment. So yes, diversity is more than welcome. Diversity is what hopefully should be like the path for cred, really.
Fantastic. We're running out of time, but before we close, I just wanted to announce to this audience that is still patiently with us, with the that the follow-on to today's webinar, as Avneet has already mentioned, is that she has two other modules, module 1 and 2. Together combined, there will be about a 3-hour workshop that she has volunteered to conduct face-to-face as well as virtually. The face-to-face is available to colleges in North India, because she's going to be in India May, I think, 14th to the 22nd or around about that. And I've already sent this information to some of our consortium colleges in the north. And so if they are interested, if some of them are represented in today's webinar, you must follow up. Please talk with your management and follow up so that we can finalize the dates of where and when these will be done. I think typically we're targeting the Delhi, Chandigarh, and Jaipur, the three places. Jaipur, the three places where Avneet will be for about a week or 10 days in May. So when she's there, she has, she will give these face-to-face 3-hour workshops for maybe, at one location for several colleagues, or whatever the format is. We can work out the logistics. And of course, those of you who are not in that northern part of India are not able to be part of the face-to-face, she will be giving these same the content of the face-to-face workshops in the form of webinars sometime, I believe, in June, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And in the meantime, we will right away in the next day or two, we will start a little community online, a virtual community with this recording on it, so that you can start asking questions, commenting, and so on as you move along and build on that community. So I'll give you a chance, Avneet, to say anything last words before we close up.
Just a big thank you to everyone who's here, and thank you to IUCEE for making this happen. And please, I mean, the entire idea behind this is to have conversations. So please be a part of this conversation, and please throw any question at me at any time, and I'd be more than happy to be a part of it.
And by the way, if anybody wants to communicate with Avneet, her email ID is
there we
Hira,
go. My bad.
Ahira at Purdue.edu, right? Is that correct?
Yes, yes. In fact, I just put it on the screen if people's screens are still, my bad.
The screen is still active, yeah. So I think it'll probably come up, yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much, Avneet, and we'll be in touch. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye.